Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Montgomery Focus, and we've got a really special program for you this time. We all know that the city seal for Montgomery says that it is the birthplace of the civil rights movement. Our guests today can vouch for that firsthand because not only were they around to witness it from a front row seat, they were actually arms deep into the movement. We're pleased to have the Reverend Robert and Mrs. Jean Graetz joining us on Montgomery Focus. Welcome to the show, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Michael.
I don't know where to begin, but I guess I want to take a page from your first book and ask you to start with a recollection of the night of January 10th, 1957. You were at your home in the parsonage, and then what happened?
Well, our 9-day-old son had just come home from the hospital. My mother had come down to Montgomery to help us take care of that baby and the other children we had. And we were all sound asleep in the middle of the night, 2 o'clock in the morning. There was a loud sound outside the house, and Jeannie and I sat up in bed, startled, and Jeannie said, "My word, it's another bomb."
Mrs. Graetz, that's probably a lot more composed reaction than what I would have had. You felt the house shake, obviously, and your first reflex had to be to check on all of your loved ones, I imagine.
Right. Went from room to room to make sure everybody was okay. Mm-hmm. And we were glad that the baby was crying because that kept my mother occupied and out of trouble.
Sure. And that wasn't the only device that was found.
As a matter of fact, when we started moving outside, looking around to see how much damage had been done, people from all over the neighborhood gathered there in our front yard, and we kept tripping over something in the driveway, and the power was out because the lines had been snapped off, and somebody had some matches and lit a match, and we all leaned over to see what we were tripping over, and it was another bomb. 11 sticks of dynamite in a container of TNT, and that bomb had not exploded.
And it was almost divine because a friend of yours who was at the Cleveland Court Apartments saw the fuse, I guess, and disabled it, I imagine.
Yeah, he was sitting up talking with some friends in the apartments there, and when he heard the bomb go off, he said, "It's got to be the Graetzes." Came rushing over to the house, saw the bomb, defused it, and he had been a demolitions expert in the Army.
Mm-hmm. Wow. And Mrs. Graetz, as a mom with a newborn, what goes through your mind when this?
We had 3 other children.
Yeah.
And the thoughts were, those people may have hated us, but how could they hate 4 little children and tried to kill us all? That haunted me for many years.
Sure. And you said this is another bomb, so there was another instance earlier, a few months prior to that, when the first bomb went off, but you mercifully were not in your home at the time, right? Tell us about what happened in that instance.
Well, that time the bomb went off almost out to the street, so that the damage that was done was minimal. No real major structural damage to the house. It just broke all the windows and messed things up for us. But that had gone off in August of 1956 while we were all gone away, and we were in Tennessee at the time.
And who were you with in Tennessee, Mrs. Graetz, and what were you doing, and what was your response, or how quickly did you decide to try to get back home?
Well, we were at Monteagle, Tennessee, at the
Highlander Folk
School, and he was on the staff for a program about something, and we had Mrs. Rosa Parks with us. We took her with us, and we all had the program finished up on Saturday, and we found out Saturday morning that our house had been bombed and came back. And my first thought about that was intimidation. I didn't think they must have known we weren't home, or if they whatever reason they did it, they were after us to leave. The Klan did not like us.
Yeah. And so you drove from Tennessee here to Montgomery, and was there a crowd surrounding your home at the time, or the police had set up barriers to keep everyone away? What was the scene like, and what was Mrs. Parks' response to the violence?
Well, Mrs. Parks' response was the most interesting. We got into the house and started going from room to room just to check things out. And she disappeared. And we wondered where in the world she had gone. Of course, she lived right across the street, so she might have just gone home. But we found her in the kitchen with a broom and dustpan, sweeping up the broken glass in the kitchen so we'd be able to get in and out of there. That's the kind of person she was.
Very serene and action-minded.
But the police had cordoned off our house and wouldn't let our members or anybody in.
And here's a picture of the parsonage. That was taken this year. How much has the house changed since when you lived there nearly 60 years ago?
Not much.
Not much at all. Bars on the windows, that's about the only change.
Yeah.
And a giant plate glass window, or a giant window that's at the front of the house. And I guess that caused you a little bit of concern because people revealed that they could see you inside the house and also see your children.
Yes, lots of times when anonymous calls would come into us, they would talk about what they could see from where they were.
So we started shutting the curtains at night.
Of course. Now, neither of you are natives of Montgomery. Tell us about your childhoods. Mrs. Graetz, you were raised on a farm in Pennsylvania near Lake Erie.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about growing up on a farm and what that was like.
Well, we learned to, there were 5 of us girls. My father did not get his boys, and so we did all the boy jobs and learned to work and learned good habits and...
Milked cows.
Yeah, we did everything.
Sure. And I'm told there was a fur line that you worked.
Oh, I did.
What is a fur line, just for us city slickers? And how much money is there in the fur line business?
Well, I didn't call it that. I just had a trap line.
A trap line. Okay, I'm sorry.
And I just thought it would be a neat way to earn some money, and my grandpa helped me skin this muskrat. And that was what I caught most of, and we did it once, and then I decided that I would just take it to the place and let them do that job.
And what were muskrat pelts going for?
I have no idea. I don't remember how much we got for each hide, but that was what I got most of. I remember at one time I got a mink.
Oh.
That was my prize.
Sure, sure.
But I just did it one winter. And,
good deal. And Reverend Graetz, you were raised in West Virginia.
West Virginia.
And racial sensitivity or empathy for other races wasn't at the forefront of your consciousness during your early childhood.
That's correct. And, as a matter of fact, I really didn't know any black people and had no knowledge of what went on in the black parts of town. That was a foreign country as far as I was concerned.
So what happened that gave you this heightened awareness and led you to become the man that you became?
Well, what happened was that I grew up knowing some Jewish kids and learning from them how Jews were treated improperly and unfairly, and was always disturbed about the fact that my friends were not treated right. When I got into college and had an opportunity to do a research paper on a subject that I could choose, I decided to do it about discrimination against Jews, and by accident found out that there was worse discrimination and harsher treatment against African Americans. And I was so angry at myself for being ignorant about this that my whole life changed around, and I became totally involved in race relations from that time until now.
That was a complete 180. In your book, which was excellent, by the way, and I recommend anyone that is a history buff or just concerned about our city, that they read a white preacher's memoir. You mentioned that you thought you would be able to try to pass yourself off as African American just to get a better understanding for the plight in which blacks lived in during that time.
I thought it might be possible. I had heard of the book Black Like Me, and I thought, well, if he can do it, I should be able to do it. And tried to figure out some way to pull that off, and decided that I would drop out of school and sign up at some African American college or university and just pretend that I was a very bright-skinned African American.
Right.
A good friend of mine, however, set me straight. I was talking to him about my plans much later than when it was beyond the time I could have pulled it off.
Right.
But I was just talking to him about that, and he said, you know, you could never do that. And I argued with him that I was sure that I could. I had lived in African American communities and worked and ministered there, and surely I could pull it off. And he said, no, there's one good reason. I said, what's that? He said, you can always come back. We can't.
So he was saying mentally you would not be able to put yourself in our footsteps, but he thought that appearance-wise you would be able to deceive, I guess?
Well, what he was saying was that if somewhere along the line I decided this wasn't worth it,
right,
I could always go back to wherever I came from, and nobody would ever accuse me of being an African American.
Right.
I would be free again.
Sure. Well, tell us about coming to Montgomery. You decided to pursue the Lord's work and as a member of the Lutheran clergy. What was that like for a young set of newlyweds, and what were some of the complications that us lay people just don't take, that we can't even conceive of?
I'm not sure how many of those I could identify.
By that time, we weren't newlyweds. We already were married and spent 2 years out in California at another black congregation, and had 2 children.
But there were times when, as you worked to complete your academics, that you were separated from your wife and children.
That was a major struggle because we had 2 children when we entered the last year of seminary training, and she was ill and was in the hospital several times, and I was working full-time and going to school full-time, and we weren't sure we were going to be able to survive this kind of a rat race for a year. And the interesting thing about that, a little sidelight, we prayed about this constantly and what we were going through, and somehow came to the awareness that God must be preparing us for something much more difficult than anything we had done before. This had to be His way of preparing us. Of course, we had no way of knowing what was coming.
What was coming, indeed. You mentioned, Mrs. Graetz, going out to California and pastoring a church at that time that was made up of worshipers primarily from another race. Was the racial situation in California much different from Montgomery, or there were quite some similarities in place?
Well, we had lived in black neighborhoods in Columbus, Ohio, and in California, but we were not prepared for the segregation, the laws of segregation in Montgomery. That was just, we were just regular people at other places where we had been, but here they expected us to be white. And we had not lived that way the rest of our life before that.
How long were you in California? And did you have to drive from Ohio to California with the young kids in the car, or
On the way home.
the Lutheran Church sprung for a seat on Pan American Airlines?
Never heard of it. Actually, Jeannie was pregnant when we were supposed to leave for California, and we had to fly her out. The doctor said she cannot fly, so she had to fly with the children. Later on, I had to go out by myself. Drove all the way out to California.
We didn't have children by then.
Oh, I guess you're right.
We had two while we were in California.
Sure.
But she was pregnant when we left, so we were about ready to have a child. But she had to fly out, and I drove out by myself.
How long did that take, Mary Graetz?
It seemed like about a year and a half.
Were there issues with the car? Because I
Well, it was a 1941 Ford, and this was 1952.
Sure.
So yeah, there had to be issues with the car, and there were times when I wasn't sure the car was going to make it all the way out there. But we made it to California, and it lasted another year out in California before it just broke down completely.
Yeah. And there was some dilemma over whether or not the family could afford a new car at the time, and how did you rectify your transportation needs?
Well, no, what happened was that when we discovered that the car was not going to run anymore, it just happened that I had dropped by to pick up one of my superiors to go to a church meeting, and this man said, "Listen, leave your car here. I've got a mechanic in the congregation, and he'll fix it up while we're gone, and then I'll drive you to the meeting." And by the time we came back, he said, "I've got a message from the mechanic. You may drive it home, but it won't get any farther."
Oh, go.
In the meantime, this pastor also had a car salesman in his congregation. And he said, "I want you to go over and talk to the salesman. I've talked to him about your needs." And I can't remember what make it was, but it was not one of the cheap makes. And when we saw the sign to find out what kind of cars we were looking at, immediately we decided, well, we're not going to be able to buy a car here, but we promised we'd go talk with this member, so we did. He said, "You got to take it out for a spin." So we took it out and drove it around and spotted everything we could think of that might be wrong with it,
Right.
so that we would be saying this is why we don't want to buy it.
They should be embarrassed to even have it available for sale.
Right. And each time I mentioned something different that was wrong with it, he said, "We'll take care of that. We'll take care of that. We'll take care of that." And finally I thought, well, the only thing left is the price. He's going to tell me what it is. He offered that car to us at a price less than any of the cheap models that we had looked at. And we figured, this must be something the Lord has worked out. We had no idea it was going to happen. And that car gave us great service for quite a while.
Sure. And did you receive contributions or donations from friends that helped you pay the car off in time for you to not take out a loan and could just pay it off as cash?
That was another miraculous story. The dealer told us what the car would cost us, and it was way beyond anything we could afford.
We were making $175 a month.
$175 per month.
Per month, yes. And
Buy a
I
car
heard
on
myself saying, if we make this a cash deal, how soon would we have to have all the money together to pay for it? And he told me how many months it would take. And I said, well, then put it down as a cash deal. And as we walked out, we were thinking, how in the world are we going to find that money to buy this for cash? The Sunday school of the pastor who had made these arrangements took up an offering. People from several other congregations who had learned about our plight at that meeting we had attended took up offerings. My grandfather decided this was a good time to share some of his unneeded cash at the time and sent us a check. And
he didn't know anything about it.
He knew nothing about our plight,
wow.
not one word about it. And we got to the time when we needed to pay for the whole thing. The money was all there. We paid for the car, and the checks stopped coming in.
So the way out of no way materialized, and then
Right.
once the miracle had been accomplished. Wow, that's awesome. So after California for a few years, you returned back to Ohio?
Back to Ohio for the last year in the seminary.
And then when did you get the word, or what were the developments that led to the Graetz family coming here to Montgomery?
Well, the pastor of a black Lutheran congregation in Montgomery had left to go out and serve that congregation where we served for 2 years.
Okay.
And since he was gone, they needed to find a new pastor, and they inquired from our church officials in Ohio. And they said, we have a young man who's just graduating from the seminary who has worked in colored communities, and we think he'd do a good job for you. So for the last few months, we were waiting for the time to come when I would graduate and we would come to Montgomery, Alabama.
Mrs. Graetz, you were with child when you guys arrived in June, no less.
Yeah.
Not absolutely the most comfortable month, I imagine, to be coming to the Deep South in that condition either.
No, I was fine.
Women are always tougher than the men. So when you got here, did you arrive at nighttime? Is that what I recall? And the lights were out?
I don't remember that part. I remember
It was late in the day, though.
Sure.
that our furniture had not arrived,
Right.
but people from the congregation brought some mattresses over and some food, and we were fine.
Chairs.
And you were not the first white pastor for Trinity Lutheran, is that correct? Or
As a
they
matter
had
of fact,
missionaries.
Yeah, that congregation had white missionaries, German missionaries from Ohio, who came to Alabama and Mississippi and started churches and schools for black people.
Back when there weren't good schools.
Sure.
Back in the early 1900s.
Right,
when it
right.
got
In fact, we have
started.
a shot of the historical marker that's in front of the church, and it mentions its origins and the work that it did to meet the congregation's spiritual needs and educational needs as well. What was the reception? You said that your congregation gave you furniture until your permanent furniture arrived. Did they welcome you with
Oh, yeah.
open arms
Oh,
Oh
yes.
my, yes.
from the onset?
Oh,
Yeah,
from the
right
outset.
beginning.
Yeah.
And this was nothing new to them. They had memories of these white pastors having been there before, so that this was not anything new for them.
And at that time, we were affiliated with the Ohio Synod, and since then they have gone to a different synod. So
How big was the congregation? I think of African Americans in the Deep South being Baptists and nothing else,
Right.
but apparently there is at least a Lutheran presence for sure.
yeah, 200.
Oh wow, 200 people?
Mhm.
Excellent. Now the Lutheran Church knew about the political environment here in Montgomery at the time, and did they made you promise not to become activists. Is that
Yes,
right?
as a matter of
Yeah,
fact,
right.
I had been involved in some active things in Ohio when we were still in school, and
Yeah,
had
so-
led some demonstrations against the administration's lack of sensitivity to racial matters, and
Joined the
organized
NAACP.
a race relations club on the campus, joined the NAACP. So they knew that I wasn't going to be just a normal pastor.
They did know that, or they?
Oh, yeah.
They knew that.
And so, what was the conversation? Did they say now?
Well, this church official said to me, "We want you to go to Montgomery, but before you go, you have to promise not to start trouble." And I didn't start trouble.
We just joined
we
it.
joined
trouble.
Wow, that's a heck of a technicality. We didn't start it; it was here already. And what? I don't want to ask if there was culture shock, but I mean, how big was the culture shock, Mrs. Graetz, coming from Ohio to Montgomery, especially
Well-
once when people here realized that you were respectful of African Americans and supportive even.
And we felt very much at home, and so they felt very much at home with us.
Sure. But not everyone in the white community approved of that.
No.
Who were some of the people that mentioned their displeasure with the way that you adopted the black community here?
Well, we didn't hear much opposition until the boycott started. And then when it was obvious that we were playing an active role in the bus boycott, from that point on we heard loud and clear that the Ku Klux Klan type of people had
Well, also different church groups.
Yeah, some of those Baptists that you talked about, the white persuasion
Right.
of Baptists were very unhappy about the kinds of things that we were doing.
So now, Reverend Graetz, you even had issues of where to go to get a haircut, I recall.
That was difficult. We had promised ourselves that we would never patronize segregated facilities and try to make sure that we just avoided segregation laws any place we could. And so I knew that it was against the law for black barbers to cut my hair.
It was against the law.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, all these segregated
Virtually everything
things.
was against the law in those days.
Sure.
So I found a white barber shop, but the boycott had already been going for a while, and the awareness that I was involved in it spread in the white community. Got to the point where when I walked into the shop, nobody would talk to me. People talked around me, and the N-word became very prominent when I was in the shop. And I got to the point where I wasn't feeling very safe about the barber using that straight razor on the back of my neck to finish up the haircut.
Sure.
And decided that I had to find a black barber. I just happened to have a black barber in our congregation whose shop was off to the side where very few white people would be going by there, and I decided to go to him and get my hair cut. It also just happened that while I was sitting in the chair getting my hair cut, a white salesman walked in, and that poor barber did a dance while he was there, trying to stay between me and the salesman. And I thought he had pulled it off, but we found out 50 years later when we came back to Montgomery that night the Klan had come by and broken out all of the windows in his shop. And he said to his children, "We're not going to tell Pastor Graetz about this because he would feel bad about it." So for 50 years, we never knew that had happened. His daughter and son, who are still members of the congregation, told us after we came back to Montgomery in 2005 that their father had done that for us.
Oh my gosh.
But I started cutting his hair at that time.
That's always the good solution. Your obstetrician, and I guess other professionals that you dealt with, Mrs. Graetz, they shared their discontent with you as well.
Yeah, and the nurses in there, I mean, they felt that they had to set us straight about how we were supposed to be living and punishing a little bit.
Yeah. That's unbelievable to me. I guess for those of us who were not there at the time and aren't fully cognizant of just how far our community has progressed, it's an eye opener for sure.
And I felt very ashamed to go to the hospital to have 3 different babies in the regular hospital, and my friends had to go out to there was a building out back where they had to go.
So
For
black babies were delivered
and a
in a
separate
different, of course.
building.
Well, sure, if we've got separate water fountains, then of course
Yeah.
we can't have
Yeah.
black babies and white babies being born in the
Right.
same
No, that
same
would
room.
be just terrible, wouldn't it?
And swimming pools, of course, were
No.
segregated, but you avoided them because of
Oh,
the
yeah.
segregation policy?
Oh, yeah.
We
We
simply
never-
did not go places that were segregated, legally segregated.
But we had the only integrated swimming pool in our backyard. We had a big tractor tire and a tarpaulin in the middle of it and filled it up with the water.
Sure.
And our little friends came over and we had wonderful times in that pool with the kids.
Indeed. Now, at some point you had to make the hard decision of deciding, yes, we are going to be activists in the boycott, or we're going to stay off to the sidelines and let this drama play out.
Immediately.
Immediate. So there was no long decisions.
Yeah,
to
we
be made.
heard about the arrest on Friday or Saturday and had to decide whether joining this action would be starting trouble, and prayed about it and realized that if we did not take part in what was going on with our members, we might just as well go back north.
And the fact was, we were right along with them with the idea of it.
And you guys did just say from the pulpit, yes, this is something we should do. Reverend Graetz, you had the family vehicle and you were chauffeuring people
Right.
to and from.
Yeah, Sunday morning I said, all of you are supposed to stay off the buses tomorrow. I will be out in the car. Anybody that needs to ride someplace, let me know and I'll take you wherever you're going. I spent several hours that morning on December the 5th, 1955, just driving back and forth, looking for people walking on the street and picking them up. And I took off time to go to the courthouse to see Mrs. Parks found guilty of violating the segregation laws.
Here's a shot we just saw an earlier shot of you with some of the other leaders of the civil rights movement. Attorney Gray is there, and Dr. King, of course. You're looking very debonair there, Reverend Graetz. I gotta tell you, you're a good-looking guy now, but good-looking back then as well. At that point, there was no idea that the boycott was going to last as long as it did.
At first, it was set up as a one-day boycott, and when it was so totally successful, and everybody was caught up in the spirit of this new movement, we realized that it could not just last one day and then forget about it. And so the night of December the 5th, at the big mass meeting at the Holt Street Baptist Church, the gathering of people there voted unanimously to continue the boycott until certain demands were met.
And do you recall what the demands were? They were kind of low
very,
standards.
Very mild, yeah. An end to the harsh treatment of black passengers on the buses, a slight change in the segregation system so that wherever the two lines would meet, black people seating from the back and the white people from the front, wherever those lines met, that would be it, and nobody would have to give up their seats for somebody of another race.
And black drivers.
And black drivers on those runs that mostly served black people. Very mild. We couldn't call them demands, but that's what we called them.
And yet they were rebuffed,
they were rebuffed because the white leadership decided that if they gave in on anything at all, they'll be back and want something more.
Sure.
So they weren't going to give in even 1 inch.
And your altruism or your willingness to help the boycotters got you in trouble with the law.
Yes, as a matter of fact, not long after the boycott started, I got a call in the middle of the night. I had signed up as a volunteer driver. I got a call in the middle of the night saying, we want you to go to Dean's drugstore from 6 to 9 every morning and haul people. So every morning I spent those 3 hours back and forth. One morning I picked up a load of people and started off away from Dean's drugstore. Heard a siren, saw a light behind me, pulled over to the side, and this big man got out of the car behind, came walking up, put his hands on the window ledge, looked at me and said, "I'm Sheriff Maxim Butler and you're under arrest." Scared the heck out of me.
Bet.
Because the jails were segregated too, so I knew I was going to end up in a white jail, and that I didn't think that was very healthy for me.
Because by then your reputation of being a friend and supporter of black people was known throughout the white community.
At least part of the white community.
So what happened? You did get brought into a holding area or something?
Brought into an office in the courthouse and discovered that the way of life in the South was built in strongly to respect any white person, even a white person who might disagree with what the majority of people liked and believed. And the sheriff went to a judge to see what he could do to putting me in jail. And that everything he wanted to charge me with, the judge would say, "Now, you know he didn't do that. You can't put him in jail for that." And the sheriff was telling me this when he came back to the office, like a half hour or an hour later. Went through all these things that he and the judge had talked about. And he was forced to turn me loose because I was white, and he couldn't just throw me into jail for no reason at all. And that saved my life.
And Mrs. Graetz, while this is going on, I mean, you're typical mother. You're concerned about your husband's well-being, your well-being of your children as well. But you had a conversation with someone one day, and in the book you reflected that it gave you a sense of inner peace, and that everything was going to be all right. Tell us about the conversation. Who was it with, and do you recall what was said?
Well, he was out of state speaking to get money for the boycott, and we had people coming to the door fussing at us about being Northern agitators and that we ought to leave and all that. And this nice, handsome young priest came by and was very friendly. And then he said, I appreciate what you all are doing, but I want to tell you, you really need to leave. He said, I grew up in the South, and I know that eventually they're going to kill you. And you really need to leave. And it really, I just felt very, very vulnerable at that time. And Bob wasn't there, and I called a friend of ours to come over and pray with me, and he reminded me, and this is something that I really knew, but he reminded me that the Lord was still in charge, no matter what happened. And it was just like like the Holy Spirit came, and I could understand and realize that was what was going to happen. And I just felt like the Lord had touched me and got me over that.
And from that point forward, the fear that I certainly would have had left you. You were okay.
Most of the time. One of the things that had happened that scared me was that, we're living in the black community, and one night somebody came up our driveway right next to our house and put sugar in the gas tank and slashed the tires. And the fact that I knew that somebody had come up there, and it was just kind of a violation of our privacy and all that. And for a while I felt very nervous about going out and taking the trash out at night, and I feel like somebody could be coming around in the back of the house and things like that. But I got over it, and I felt like one of my jobs was to not be afraid and to teach our children that that everything was okay, and to be a haven for my husband coming home, because he's out in the trenches and receiving a lot of this hate that we were kind of protected from being at home.
At one point during the blasts, you realized that shards of glass were just being sent as projectiles everywhere. So you made a game for your children to do what to protect themselves.
Well, we had a sofa that kind of leaned against the wall, and it was right opposite the big window that got broken every time that they threw bombs. And the shards of it came into the house and went into the walls and into the sofa and all over. And and that was one of the places kids played all the time. And when we had people that threw rocks onto the roof, and you'd hear it bang, bang down, coming across the roof, and you never knew whether it was going to be a bomb or what it was. So anyway, we made this game. So if I tell you, go hide behind the couch, then that was a play place back there, and it wasn't a scary thing. But sometimes when somebody came to the door, I would want to have them out of the way, and they'd go running back there. And they were all little kids at that time.
Eventually, they were traumatized as well. You mentioned in the book that one time, Reverend Graetz, you just going to turn the faucet on the outside of the house on, and that noise startled your son.
I was getting some water for our dog, and Bobby started crying inside. And, you know, if you have a loose washer on a faucet like that, it makes a strange sound. And Jeannie went into the bedroom to see what was wrong, and what's the matter, Bobby? Did those bad men come and boom our house again? No, that's just Daddy giving some water for Skippy. And he finally went to sleep. I thought it was those bad men coming to boom our house again. And it was just Daddy giving water to Skippy. Yeah. Finally drifted off to sleep.
At any point during this terrorism, did you consider saying, okay, enough, let's go back to Ohio?
No, that wasn't one of the possibilities.
And Mrs. Graetz,
no.
You neither? No. That's you're made of special stuff. That's for sure.
I convinced myself that they were just trying to scare us and make us go home. And I know that it was more than that, but that was my way of getting through the trauma.
And the neighborhood had embraced you to the point where they were watching out for your well-being as well. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Yeah. So no one could get close to the Graetz house without the pipeline sending
somebody
word.
seeing them,
Yeah. You mentioned in your book, Reverend Graetz, that one time you had to walk from downtown and you were feeling anxiety-ridden until you got to the black neighborhood.
Yes. As a matter of fact, I had been downtown at a session of the court, and which was not designed to make us feel good anyway. And walking through the white neighborhood with this, being burdened by what was going on in the court, and didn't even think about it. When I crossed the street and moved into a black neighborhood, everything changed, and I wasn't consciously thinking about, well, now I'm in a better place, but just my mind inside of me said, now you're with your people.
Now, when you moved to Montgomery, it was probably right around the same time as Dr. and Mrs. Coretta King, and they were around your same age, so you got to know them pretty intimately.
Yes, we got to know them only slightly before the boycott started, but once it started, we were with them a number of times, and of course, Martin and I were both working on the board of the Montgomery Improvement Association, along with everybody else who was available.
Sure. What was Dr. King like? I mean, I think he's reached mythic, legendary proportions today, but he was just an ordinary person, I'm sure.
Or
an extraordinary person.
Yeah. Extraordinary.
Every one of those myths is real. I mean, he truly was a gifted orator. Well, I don't have to tell you that because you can just listen to his speeches and his sermons. Someone who had deep concerns for the well-being of other people and took these burdens on himself, feeling like he was responsible for what happened to all of the people in his community, and not just black people, but he kept reminding us that if black people are freed, that will free up white people as well. So he had this broad concern for all of humanity and carried that burden with him.
And he said that we could not, the black community at that time could not respond to hate with hate.
Correct.
And couldn't use weapons because the other side had the police department, which had more weapons, and that turning the other cheek was the only way that the movement
Right.
could be successful.
Mm-hmm.
Nonviolent.
Nonviolent.
Yeah.
And loving your adversary, I
Yes.
imagine.
In fact, he would not let us call our adversaries our enemies. He said, they're not our enemies. They are our oppressors,
Mm-hmm.
but we can't think of them as enemies. We need to love them.
And Mrs. Graetz, what was Mrs. Parks like? I guess you guys were really close acquaintances if you're taking trips up to Tennessee together. That's a lot of time in the car to shoot the breeze.
Well, she was, even though she didn't have children, she was motherly, and she loved children, and they loved her, and it was just a very nice friend, and a very busy one.
Did she ever lose her temper? The image I have right now is that she was always laid back and collected and calm and
Serene.
thoughtful. Serene.
Yes.
But determined.
Yes.
You know, she had strength and knew what was right and what was not fair, and stood up for it.
Sure. Were you surprised that her arrest triggered the boycott, or you knew right off the bat, okay, this was a twist of fate that was going to lead to great change?
Well, she was so quiet and dignified that you wouldn't think of her taking the position of standing up and openly defying someone with authority, although her internal bravery and courage carried her beyond those, the threat against her when she actually refused to give up her seat.
But she was very active in NAACP. She was the
adult advisor to the NAACP Youth Council, which met in our church. That's
what I was
where we
saying,
first
sure.
got to know her.
Wow. And after the boycott was over, you were called back to Ohio, and yet 2005 you decided to come back to Montgomery. What brought you back?
Well, Alabama State University got a hold of us and said, if you'll come back and help us with a year-long celebration of the 50th anniversary of the bus boycott, we'll give you free housing on campus.
Wow.
And it was an offer we couldn't refuse.
Well, we had been back to Montgomery many, many times during this time. We brought, we came for anniversaries, and we also brought pilgrimages down here from Ohio, and brought people to the civil rights places in Atlanta and Birmingham and Selma and Montgomery.
And you're not just resting on your laurels here. I know the university has the annual Graetz Symposium. Tell us what the symposium's goals are and what you try to accomplish every year.
Well, to boil down the goals of the symposium, we're working to advance the cause of the beloved community that Dr. King used to talk about, which brings people across all of the lines that would otherwise divide us, whether it's race or religion or language or whatever else it might be, sexual orientation, opening up our hearts to other people and respecting other people and seeing the values that they have in them. So we're focusing in a variety of ways on helping people to understand what it means to reach out to other people the way Dr. King asked us all to do.
Sure. And Mrs. Graetz, your involvement with the university extends to the classroom as well.
Yes. I was never able to finish up at Capital University, although I went back when we were in serving another black congregation in Columbus. And I wanted to go ahead and get my degree. And so I've been working very diligently and with much challenge and taking classes here.
Sure. Computer classes, you and I have spoken about that, and I'm still waiting for you to tutor me once you've got it got it down, because I don't know a RAM for, I can't even think of a term, two terms together to complete my thought, but it's hats off to you. I know that I could not do it. A few years back, in 2011, the city renamed a community that was just off of what's now Rosa Parks Street or Boulevard, I don't know. Avenue and West Fairview, and you guys were there. We've got some pictures from that particular day. The Graetz neighborhood now. Tell us what that was like and how that came about.
It was an enormous surprise, and a very pleasant one, of course, when we were worshiping at what used to be Trinity Lutheran Church, the congregation that we had served before. And the pastor asked us to come up to the front. A group of ladies came up with us, and they presented us with a plaque naming that neighborhood the Graetz neighborhood. A total surprise to us, and a very pleasant surprise.
Indeed.
We just feel so honored.
Indeed, and there are more pictures. You were presented with a key to the city and had the chance to make remarks. I was there that day, and it was just, the weather was pleasant,
Yeah,
and
it was
was great. Have your family members been down to see your neighborhood now? And do you
yes.
you get to reign supreme and collect taxes from people because they're in your neighborhood, or that does not happen?
They didn't tell me we could do that. I'll have to talk to the mayor.
Indeed. What does the future hold? What will you guys do as you continue? I guess more symposia are in line, and a march down the aisle in a cap and a gown real soon
One
as
of these
well.
days.
And
We are consultants to the National Center for the Study of Civil Rights and African American Culture at Alabama State. That's one of the things that we are involved with.
And as our responsibility with that group, one of the things we do more than anything else is to speak to groups that come there to the center literally from all over the world.
Of course.
A lot of groups that are traveling under the auspices of the United States State Department will express an interest in civil rights, and so they send these groups, all of them, to Alabama State.
And when you lived there on what was then Cleveland Avenue, you had a steady stream of visitors from across around the planet, around the globe as well. Did that ever get tiring, or you just said this is part of what God's plan for us is?
Well, Jean is the one who bore the most of that burden, because she had to fix food for all these people from all over the world. And it was fascinating to church officials, writers, magazine editors, all sorts of people.
Reporters.
Reporters from all over the place.
This was something that happened in Montgomery that had not ever worked in the other places that were struggling against segregation.
Right. It was the perfect combination of all the elements that allowed it to gain traction and to be successful. I can't imagine today if someone told me, Michael, you need to walk for a full year in order to support this principle. Just unbelievable. And good leadership obviously is part of that component as well.
You ask what the future is. We've still got books to write. But one book that he wrote in 2005 was a white preacher's message on race and reconciliation. And that talks about all the different civil rights and human rights issues that the Lord led us to be involved in.
Indeed. And you mentioned in one of your prefaces that we need to be more loving towards one another, not just race lines and
Right.
gender lines, but also other ways that we find to divide ourselves that are just ridiculous.
And we need that right now more than any time I can think of. When you see what's happening in Washington, D.C. particularly, and how difficult it is to get anybody to come together to bargain and to try to find a way around some of these impasses that we've gotten ourselves into. The future doesn't look very, very bright at this point.
No. But ultimately, we're going to be all right.
Yes, yes. The Lord brought us this far.
He
I don't
has,
think He's
indeed.
about to turn us loose.
Well, I cannot tell you what a pleasure it is personally to have spent the past hour with you learning about what it was like back then and just being inspired by the brilliant examples that you continue to be. And Godspeed for you, and I hope you've got we've got many more decades together to hang out. Thank you very, very much, both of you, for joining us today.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us. We'll see you right here next time on Montgomery Focus.